Welcome to Wherever You Are. My name's Peter Kerr, and I've got in the co-host chair Reed Little. And today we are going to talk about two post-punk albums that have a great reputation: Joy Division, Unknown Pleasures, and Gang of Four Entertainment. So let's get straight off the bat. I'll defer to you, Reed, and tell us a little bit about Joy Division and Unknown Pleasures.
Okay, so I always like to establish a little bit of context. Funny story first, that album cover, my sister got me a t-shirt with that pattern on it years ago. And then when I got that album cover, I was like, hey, check it out, it's my t-shirt. So I am old enough to have experienced post-punk in real time, but I did not. In fact, I had never heard the term post-punk until probably last year. What I was familiar with was new wave. And that's because, as I sometimes tell the story, growing up in Montana, we didn't have access to a lot of variety of music on the radio. And it wasn't until MTV came into town that I really got exposed to the wider world of music. And by then, even post-punk bands like Devo and the Talking Heads were just straight up pop bands. So I've been watching talk about post-punk with interest because I'm going back and exploring musical genres that I never explored now that I've got some time. And in one of his History in 5 Songs podcast, Martin Popoff mentioned this book, Rip It Up and Start Again, by Simon Reynolds, post-punk 1978 to 1984. So as you can see, I'm about halfway through it. It's a fascinating book. And as I was saying on a previous talk, halfway into it, I still don't know what the hell post-punk is. Other than the fact that you define it by an era, I don't know what makes post-punk music. So when I wanted to start listening to post-punk music, I went to what I remember people talking about, and that is Joy Division. So I like bands like Sisters of Mercy and the Kerr that are heavily influenced by Joy Division, and I had known of them because of that. So I tracked down Joy Division and gave it a listen. And I have to say, coming in literally dead cold, no pun intended, sorry, dead singer of Joy Division, I really enjoyed it. It is very interesting music. It's very different than what I listen to most of the time, which is classic hard rock, metal, some industrial, but no post-punk, no punk at all. So I found the style of music where it's very bass forward is very unusual to me because, of course, as a metal guy, you're used to the riff being the thing. And sometimes in just basic rock, it's not maybe as riff oriented, but it's still big chords and melodies. So a song that is made up primarily of a beat and a bass line is very different. And the music is very spare and atmospheric because of that. The guitars are very, very bright and jangly. And then you lay over that with that really strange, sometimes atonal singing. And I think he uses that as a weapon on the recording because he can sing in tune. And then there are just lines that he's half a step off, and it really just creates this tension in the music. And I think that serves the lyrical themes of it so well. It really does grab your attention. Although there's a lot of times where I'm like, I could definitely see this as a dance track if you took the vocals off and just had kind of a trance-like beat going with the music. And I can, again, experiencing it now 40 years after the fact, you can see all of the things that came out of this style of music. But it's still accessible enough to be fun. It still has a good beat to it. It's not dirgy, as I think sometimes Joy Division gets, at least in my experience, people have described Joy Division to me as being kind of a very drony, very dirgy band. And I have not heard their second album, but this album, I thought that was not accurate at all. It's got a lot of energy to the music. It's the man's voice is a little bit drony, but again, I think he does that on purpose. He's creating an effect with his voice. So I really enjoyed it. I would not necessarily recommend it for committed metalheads, but anybody who likes pop or dance style music or experimenting with music from the 80s, although I believe this album's from the late 70s.
1979.
Yeah, so right at the transition period. You know, if you were a fan of David Bowie's Ashes to Ashes and you've never heard Joy Division, give it a shot. It's a great album.
Yeah, well, my journey with Joy Division's a little bit different. And so in Australia in the 80s, there was an alternative radio station called Triple J, and they used to have the 100 greatest songs of all time, where listeners would vote for their greatest, their favorite song. And over a number of years, the number one song, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure somebody will, was Love Will Tear Us Apart by Joy Division.
Oh.
And I guess when you're in music, you go through phases, and, some things you groove on at the time or you don't groove on. And I loathed that song. I didn't like it. But anyway, I liked New Order, because out of the ashes of Joy Division, where the tragic death of Ian Curtis in 1980, just before he was going to do the first American tour with the band, after a couple of years, the nucleus of the band, Bernard Sumner and Peter Hook on the bass, etc., formed New Order. And they were very much a dance electronic band, and I really loved them. And they were very popular in the UK and Australia. And I think they've got the number one best ever selling 12-inch single with Blue Monday. So I'm sure, Reed, if you probably have heard it, it's been in commercials, it's been everywhere. So that was my familiarity with Joy Division, but the Love Will Tear Us Apart, that sort of backed off, and yes, you're right, they had a reputation of being a very dour band. So I was in New Zealand in a record store, and I saw the Unknown Pleasures album. I thought, I'll give it a rap. I bought it, and lo and behold, I loved it. I think it's a great album, and I think that Ian Curtis, the lead singer, his vocals, he is channeling Jim Morrison. In fact, I think he's channeling that band. When you look at it, it's all the previous generation of those sort of the Godfather's alternative music. And I've got this theory that alternative music can be put back to one or two albums, and that's the Velvet Underground self-titled. I mean, it barely went gold, but gee, it spawned about 1 million bands out of that Lou Reed album.
Right.
And the Stooges, with a bit of Jim Morrison. So you listen to Ian Curtis, he's just got that Jim Morrison, and also Iggy Pop. His stage persona was very much Iggy Pop. And I've read a lot, and it sort of says that his other influences were David Bowie, Kraftwerk, and you can understand it. It's all in this sort of through this prism, through this album. I think it's a very moving album. There's a lot about, it's from the heart. It's about he was a very tortured soul, and it was all about loss of control, guilt, just a lot of emotional stuff that was in his head because he was going through a lot of turmoil. And I think it's just a wonderfully, beautifully constructed album. And it's the sort of album that I would put the lights down and have a glass of red and look at the city landscapes of city skyline and just take it in, because some of it's very ambient, some of it is very discordant. It goes a range of emotions. I think that it's just a great debut album, and been very influential, because I think that bands like The Cure, And even more modern bands like the National and the Drums, you look at the way the lead singer with that baritone and the emoting, I think it can all be sort of, there's a lineage back to Ian Curtis in that album. So I think it's really worth investigating closer, Reed, because Joy Division, that album and that band over the, it's just an emotional sort of piece. And even the musicianship, like the thing that comes out is the Peter Hook bass,
Right.
which is very prevalent in New Order. I guess we're sort of used to hearing the guitar and the bass and the rhythm back, but in Joy Division and very much in New Order, it's Peter Hook that's pushed to the front, and that's a prevailing sort of bass sound, and that sort of influenced a lot of alternative bands and how they constructed the soundscapes of their albums. But
It definitely, most of your melodic hooks come from the bass, which is different. And the guitar often providing kind of a wailing counterpoint over the top.
yeah,
Which was very different, definitely new, probably new at the time. I guess that was the whole point of the Rip It Up and Start Again. They were all trying to do something different. Do you know if this album came out before the Gang of Four album we're going to talk about?
Around the same time. I don't have the actual sort of calendar
Okay.
synced, but it was definitely in the same year. But look, I think this album was a lead singer that wasn't afraid to express himself. And when you have an artist that just, it's from the heart, it's not contrived, and everything that he's singing about, like guilt, religion, isolation, you believe it. And I just think it's a stone cold classic, and it's totally authentic. And that really sort of sells it to me, whether an album is authentic at the moment. So I think this one, it really is from the heart. And gee whiz, it's so influential, because I think there are so many bands that came after, have been influenced by that album. So
You definitely could not do a record, and this is, I don't want to come off as one of those old guys who's bagging on new music, because I love technology. I keep up with technology. But if you went into a modern studio and you tried to intentionally sing half a step down, not even like a full, I shouldn't even say half step, like a microtone down, so that you're clearly out of tune, but doing it on purpose, they just auto tune you. They'd be like, this guy just can't sing. And they'd auto tune your track, and you would literally not be allowed to produce that kind of music. People would be like, what the hell are you doing?
But when I listen to it, I don't hear it as being a little bit discord. I think it's still beautiful in its own sort of way, in its own spacious sort of way. I think every part's in the right place.
There are a couple of tracks, and I did not bring my my CD to look at the names of the tracks specifically, but there are a couple of them where, I mean, again, I know he's doing it for effect, but he's so off on the chorus, it makes me go, but again, he does it to emphasize points. It's clearly a choice that he's making. And sometimes that would drive me crazy, but it works with the rest of the music. So I'm in on the whole program.
Yeah, I think, I don't hear it that way. And maybe I've got the blinkers on in regards to it, because life's not perfect. And if I want to have a perfect album with beautiful voices, I'll listen to Mariah Carey or something, which is not my genre. But to me, this is, his voice and everything. It goes hand in hand with the themes of what he's talking about. And I know in our chat, I've been saying there's a lot of, about guilt, religion, isolation, loss of control, but there are some slivers of positivity and, some little lyrical lines where he is, there is a ray of sunshine. So it really just shows, it's like a window to the soul of somebody that was, sort of going through a lot. And I think it's extraordinary that he's just revealed himself artistically, and he's got his band around that to convey that. So just going back to the discussion about what post-punk is, post-punk to me is the do-it-yourself energy of punk, but incorporating different genres, whether it's dub, funk, electronic music as well. So punk was very much about 3 minutes, fast chords, the aggression, but post-punk, I think, was going and exploring different landscapes. And I think that the Joy Division album definitely sort of, because of the spacious and, you know, letting songs just go through and absorb the atmosphere, goes into that post-punk genre. And I think the next one, if you don't mind, I'll talk about, being Gang of Four. Always don't seem to get this right. Entertainment. So this is completely different. 1979, you had a band which was Andy Gill, Hugo Burnham, Dave Wilson, and John King on vocals. So this is where the Joy Division was very much of the heart. This one is a little, you know, there is heart, but it's, to my way of reckoning, of the mind. It's very political. It's very much maybe a little bit angry. So you're talking about a band in the UK, in Thatcher, England in 1979. There was high, you know, social decay, high unemployment. And I think this band, this album is a document of the times where there was very much about what was happening in England, whether it was about terrorism, where it was unemployment, where it was the relations between men and women. This album in its own right and is quite revolutionary because of the way it was, the guitar sounds, the way it was sort of like to me, it's like the Clash, but it takes it a step forward in regards to the construction of the songs. A lot of it is very sort of instruments used as percussion. So if you're looking for an album and you're looking for riffage and melody and vocals, this album is more about the sum of the parts into a sort of a document, a bit of a, you know, sort of a very typically punk sort of very aggressive sort of funky type song. So you've got, you know, a guitarist, Andy Gill. That guitar, that very sort of jangly, jarring chord guitar sound, if you listen to U2 and The Edge, you'll see where he got his guitar style. This band has influenced so many alternative and mainstream acts. It's not funny. So even on the notes for Gang of Four, and I'll just read you, Michael Stipe from Rem, entertainment shredded everything that came before it. The Gang of Four know how to swing. I stole a lot from them. And then there's Flea. These limeys rock my world. And there's also in the linear notes how Flea was saying that The Edge was saying, I got all my guitar chops from the blues, and Flea saying that, no, you got it from Eddie Gill in that Entertainment album. So Reid, what did you think of this album?
So when I made my notes about this album, as I was going through and listening to it, the word that came up over and over again is abrasive. You know, Joy Division has a very moody but pretty cohesive sound for most of the songs. The music of Gang of Four is very abrasive. It uses a lot of open space. It uses a lot of repetition, and it uses a lot of like stabs with the guitar. The guitar is much further forward than it is in Joy Division, although there are a couple of songs that are still pretty bass heavy. This album mixes it up a lot. There's one of them, oops, sorry, a second. And my notes here to the right, is it? There's a song called 5:45, which he says 5:45 in the song anyway, but it actually sounds like Joy Division to me. It's got very bass forward. He sings in a much lower register.
Yep.
And that was why I wondered which one came out first, but they were probably in the same scene, I would presume, and had heard each other. There's one song that starts with a drum beat. It may even be that one. And then it comes in with the bass before the guitar ever hits. There's a song that starts off with like 3 minutes of howling feedback. And when I was a kid, I probably would have cranked that up just to annoy my parents. But as a, shall we say, adult of a certain age, now I find it really hard to listen to. But unfortunately, physically, because I've been a chronic migraine sufferer for years, and that song triggers me. So I have to turn it down. And that would probably make them really happy to know that they have that kind of effect on their audience. Joy Division is a much more cohesive album, I think. Entertainment goes in a lot of different directions. I think the songs kind of go in pairs. There are 2 songs in this style, and then they'll switch, and there'll be 2 songs that are a little bit different.
They were definitely exploring.
I can definitely hear the influence of this band on later bands like maybe the Psychedelic Furs and the Flaming Lips. Those sorts of
Jesus and the Mary Chain.
Jesus and Mary Chain. There was very, very sorry about this. They sound very garage rock in places. Actually, in their song Return the Gift, I hear just a little bit of David Bowie's Fashion in it. Of course, I know Bowie was a pervasive influence on that scene.
Yeah. Look, again, I think that they've got the same godfathers of Velvet Underground, David Bowie, the Stooges. I think that, the same influence has come into this band as well. But what do you think about what I was just saying about the Edge? Because that sort of, the guitar chords, like, it's not a lot of the stabby guitar in this album I found it's a very percussive album where the instruments are used as percussion. And I think that's part of because it's a very political album, it's very socially conscious. And I think because it's aggressive and abrasive, the instruments are used and as kind of, I find it very percussive with the bass and the drums and using the guitars. And I've listened to this album a couple of times during the week. And I think even though, you listen to it once and you think, you listen to it twice, you see it's all very intricate and all, the way that the songs are constructed are very clever. Like there's a lot of call and response in between the 2 singers in the band. So somebody will say something and then somebody will say another thing in as part of the narrative. I like that. And that was a lot of bands at that time, like The Clash did that sort of thing. But what do you think, now that I've told you about the Edge, can you sort of see a little bit of, how the Edge picked up his chops from that? Because I think Edge's guitar, I don't see a lot of blues in that early Boy and U2 era. I see it, a direct lineage to Andy Gill in Gang of Four.
Right. So I actually can't comment on that. The only U2 I've ever heard were their videos. And I'm talking like up to Joshua Tree. Anything past Joshua Tree, I've never even heard. So I may go back and explore the catalog of U2 one of these days.
But, early stuff.
It certainly would not. I can hear a bit of it in like, Sunday Bloody Sunday, that kind of thing.
So I described the Joy Division album as one where, drape the curtains, have a glass of red, put the lights down. This one is where I probably want to have a few beers and pogo around the pub. It's a little bit dancey, a little bit funky, and you can understand why Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers loves this album, because if you listen to the bass, and I know you said there's there's some songs that, you know, that are the bass lifted up. I could really imagine that Flea was gravitating. But look, I've done a lot of research on this album, and there's so many artists that have just cited that this Entertainment by Gang of Four it really sort of influenced them. And especially in the Australian scene, there was a band in the early 80s, quite popular, called Hunters and Collectors. Their early stuff, very much on the heavy bass and the drums and the call and response. And I think that was definitely a direct lineage to Gang of Four. So I think in, you know, the UK, maybe not as much in America, this album and Australia was quite influential. I had the pleasure of seeing them in the big day out, maybe 10 years ago. You still had Andy Gill alive. Andy's no longer with us, unfortunately. And I think John King was on vocals, and they had two other guys who were younger guys. So it was really basically 2 out of the 4 that were in the band, and they were great. They played a 40-minute set, which was just the majority was entertainment. And I tell you, when, you know, it really, it's not just, I know you were saying it was abrasive, but when you hear the live, it's quite dancey and a little bit funky. It's not a straight 4 on the floor type of rock set. Because in this album, you're saying that every 2 songs, it goes into different sort of, it switches.
Right.
As a live experience, it's very much on the bass and the drums, and it's a little bit funky. So you feel yourself moving around. It's not like a straight 4 on the floor type of rock concert.
Well, one of the points that the author makes there in Rip It Up and Start Again is that the post-punk bands were apparently very into their studio time. Many of them were much more studio bands than they were live bands. They bought their studio time super cheap. They were making albums for, quotes one of them is £100, which even in 1979, that sounds ludicrous, but apparently it was possible. So when you're in the studio, you're going to have the ability to mess around and make every song sound different if you want. You know, you just turn the knobs a little bit differently and you get a completely different sound, and you're playing with different effects. Whereas until, of course, with modern technology, it's possible, but until pretty recently, that wasn't an option when you were on stage. You were going to have one drum sound, and you were going to have one, you know, pretty similar bass sound. Maybe you could turn on, you know, turn your effects on and off, but it was still going to be, the core of it was going to be what it was. So by definition, your live set would always be a little more cohesive.
Absolutely. Well, these 2 bands were definitely alive. They were definitely getting out and doing the live thing. I don't think you can sort of accuse them of being studio. And I think they're perfect examples, whether you like the albums or not, of post-punk, where you've got to do it yourself. You've got the energy, and you're also absorbing in different genres. Like with the Gang of Four, you've got the, you know, sort of the dub and the funk type side of it. And with the you know, Joy Division, you've got that psychedelia. I'm saying psychedelia because I'm thinking of the Doors and the Velvet Underground experience. And another thing that just came to me, and before we finish up, the Joy Division, and I forgot to mention it. I know you were saying like he's a little bit, you know, off key, but the word that comes to my mind about Ian Curtis is crooner. I think he's very much a crooner, isn't he? In his own way.
He does. So this is really hard to describe, but he will actually hold a note, and then where most people have a little vibrato, right? Like, you know, I think of a singer like Bruce Dickinson, who's really known for that vibrato, but he'll hit a pitch, but he'll dive substantially above and below it. It's like if I was playing guitar and standing there hitting an actual whammy bar. And that's how he does it, to where he's just not holding a tonal center on some of those notes. And you may be a little close to it after listening to it for years or something. I don't know, but man, I'm telling you, some of them, and there's 2 songs that I wish I had been a little more thorough on my notes and put it on exactly which songs there are, but there are 2 songs where he is so far out there. And it's, again, it's not that it's, I was going to say it's not unpleasant. It actually is unpleasant, but I think it's unpleasant for an effect because he's talking about something that's unpleasant to him and he wants you to, it makes you empathize with him. It's a form of emotionally manipulating the audience.
Yeah. Well,
and I'm not saying that's a bad thing because that's what showmanship is about.
Yeah. Well, I see it from a different perspective. I think his voice is, I don't hear it as unpleasant. I think it's beautiful in its own way. And life is all about imperfections. Life is not perfect. And that's why I probably like records and vinyl and the pops than a CD, because I think that's what life is. And that's why I like this album. And I also like the Gang of Four. So I would say from our discussion, you probably go with the Joy Division more.
I do. And one other thing I was going to say about Gang of Four, I really hear the Clash in a lot of their music. You can hear that influence, especially in the vocals.
Yeah.
So that there's a real strong push through from the Clash to Gang of
Bit
Four.
of call and response.
Call
it the old call and response. Yeah.
Well, Gang of Four takes away a lot of the Clash's melody and leaves open space, though. So it's a very different experience built on the same kind of bones.
Yeah. Well, as I said, to my way of thinking, it's like instruments as percussion. And my view is I'm a fence sitter. I think they're both masterpieces. I like them equally. I think they're two sides of a coin, and it's like apples and oranges. I like both. But I really think that they're two perfect examples of post-punk, and their influences are immeasurable. It's probably spawned so many alternative bands. And to my way, my ears, I still think it sounds fresh. It doesn't sound dated at all. But look, I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you, and we'll do some more talks very soon, Reid. So thank you very much for your time, and it's been a really enjoyable experience to talk about these two post-punk albums, and we'll catch up soon. Put your comments
down. Always love being turned on to new music.
Absolutely. So put your comments down, and we'll catch up soon.
Thanks, Peter.
See ya.